Hello, and thanks for joining us on the Wonk, where we take a look at the urgent issues facing New Yorkers and dive into politics and policy to find solutions. I'm your host, Michael Jacobson, Director of the CUNY Institute for State and Local Governance. During our last episode, we took a look at what it will take to close Rikers Island. Is it really possible? Today, we continue that discussion, focusing on the politically tricky issue of borough-based jails. A few months ago, an independent commission of experts established by the New York City Council called for closing Rikers and released a blueprint of how to shutter the island within 10 years. The commission's plan presented a new model of state-of-the-art jail facilities in place of the old penal colony model that was and is embodied by Rikers. The new model includes developing smaller jail facilities in each of the 5 boroughs closer to where New Yorkers live and work. A challenging task, to say the least, and that will also require political will and community engagement. But first, CUNY TV correspondent Carol Anne Riddell takes a look at some of the ideas to replace Rikers Island and the potential obstacles.
I'm Carol Anne Riddell. The calls to close Rikers Island, New York City's infamous jail complex, have been loud and clear. And even though there's widespread agreement we need to do better, there are still plenty of questions about exactly what that means. For example, what would new jails look like and where would they be located?
Anna Pastoressa says she visited her son on Rikers Island for 6 years. 6 years without a trial until he ultimately pleaded guilty. Adding to her heartbreak was the arduous weekly trip that left her shell-shocked.
I was in total shock when I arrived there. I mean, especially being on the bus that goes over that narrow bridge, long narrow bridge. I felt like I was in some war movie. So you arrive there, they throw you out, they put you like cattle, they push you against the wall like cattle, they get dogs to sniff you, they scream information or instruction on how to get there, what to do, what not to do. To me, the fact that the island is so far away and tucked away from everyone else, that's why anything goes in there. Nobody is held accountable for what goes on there.
That physical isolation is one of the reasons behind the push to close Rikers down entirely. But what would go in its place? A new report called Justice in Design offers a starkly different vision for city jails. The report, issued as part of the Independent Commission on New York City Criminal Justice and Incarceration Reform, recommends community-based jails or justice hubs that would be located close to courts in the city, allowing for faster due process and better access for lawyers and visitors. Psychology professor Susan Apatow of City University was part of the Justice and Design team. She describes what jail should look like.
It's really important that it look like the community around it. It should not be an eyesore. Nobody wants an eyesore. Nobody wants to live in an eyesore. It should be a pleasant building from the outside. It should be normative. And from the inside, it should be able to look out on the world and have light and have soft things to sit on. And so that people are not feeling like they're cut off from the world. It's a vicious cycle, you know, when you expose people to degrading conditions and then the people are living in those conditions, and the people themselves feel degraded and they're seen as degraded. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Professor Apatow reinforces communities, including employees, detainees, and families, must be involved in the planning.
They will notice the mistakes. They will raise the hard questions. They will make sure that whatever happens as it's built will actually be stronger, better, and more sustainable.
According to the report, at any given moment in New York City, 10,000 people are in jail, but 75% of them were detained because they cannot make bail and have not been convicted of a crime. And 88% of those detained are African American or Latino. The vision for these so-called justice hubs would include interiors with direct access to daylight and air, activity spaces for officers, and new models for welcoming visitors. Also, resources for neighborhood residents, like art studios and community gardens.
Deciding where to put new jails could be a thorny and political process. There are the likely neighborhood concerns, for example, around safety and property value. But part of the idea explained in the report is redefining our perception of jails, not just what they look like, but also the purpose they serve in a community.
City Council member Andy King isn't convinced.
When it comes to their next door, people are going to say no, 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 no.
Though he's been vocal on the need to reform the city's criminal justice system, Councilmember King questions whether closing Rikers is the answer.
This is where politics come into play for many people in government. People say it's good to close Rikers Island. Again, I ask the question, how does closing Rikers Island cure the problems that we have in the criminal justice system? You're closing a building. You're not correcting the system.
There are some borough jails already. For example, the Brooklyn Detention Complex. When it reopened in 2012, there was concern in the neighborhood. But Robert Paris, district manager for Brooklyn Community Board 2, says for the most part, complaints are minimal.
There really have not been problems. We've not gotten complaints about contraband or anything like that. The only complaint is about parking.
But details can make all the difference, and for now, details on this long-term project aren't fully clear. And NIMBY, not in my backyard, can loom large.
Almost every single land use of this type ends up with NIMBY concerns about what isn't really known but is only imagined. And so I think that lawsuits are certainly possible if someone was to propose opening a jail somewhere in a more residential area.
For Anna Pastoressa, closing Rikers is not a matter of logistics or political compromise, but a moral obligation.
It's a slap to civilization. It should not exist.
It's an emotional topic that will be with us for some time. The plan to close Rikers is expected to take years. I'm Carol Anne Riddell for The Wonk.
Today we are speaking with two guests who will discuss the issues surrounding borough-based jail facilities. Here with me are Glenn Martin, president and founder of Just Leadership USA and a member of the Independent Commission on Criminal Justice and Incarceration Reform, and Jamie Springer, partner at HR&A Advisors and a consultant to the Independent Commission. Gentlemen, thank you for being here.
Good to be here.
So, Glenn, let me start with you, both because you were a member of the commission, you also are one of the leaders of the Close Rikers community-based movement, so you have an interesting perspective on all this. Why is borough-based jails, why is the notion of borough-based jails so integral to this plan?
So, thanks for the question. I also have a couple of other perspectives. One, as someone who actually served time both at Rikers and in two of the current borough houses that we have around the city, and as someone who has an older brother who was a correction officer for over a decade. Look, my experience is this, that when you're in a facility that is closer to home, one, you continue to have your relationship with your family intact. Rikers is a place where even family that's well-intentioned and wants to visit may not have 7-8 hours out of their day for what amounts to a 1-hour visit. Counsel, having your attorney visit you, giving you a chance to actually prepare your case. I mean, 70, as the video said, almost 80% of people at Rikers Island are detainees not convicted of a crime. I had a paid attorney that wouldn't come see me at Rikers Island when I served a year at Rikers. And then finally, social services. I mean, we live in a city with the most robust infrastructure of alternative to incarceration and social service organizations for people who are in the criminal justice system. And part of what allows them to do their work is access to people who are detained in our jail system. And Rikers Island is not just remote for family members and for counsel, but also for these programs.
So, Jamie, let me switch over to you because, I mean, there does seem to be, at least from the commission's point of view, a huge swath of the community, this sense that Rikers has to close, that we have to build borough jails. But I know for a lot of folks, and myself included, the process seems a bit mysterious. I mean, we're talking about taking down existing borough facilities, building new ones, citing other ones. How does that process work? What's involved from a governmental point of view? Put the politics aside for a second, and just doing a project like this.
Yeah, well, first of all, the important thing to remember is this has been done elsewhere and successfully in ways that have integrated community jails with communities and neighborhoods surrounding them. The piece talked about the Brooklyn House reopening. You had a facility that was in West Chelsea for a long time that, sort of lived through the explosive growth in the neighborhood. And we've had siting of community jails in Denver, Charlotte, Richmond, New Orleans, all without very substantial uprising in the community or discomfort. The important thing for the process in New York is that you have the ability to sort of communicate with the community and also bring in a high standard of modern design to creating these kinds of facilities that have the functions that Glenn talked about. The way it'll work is the mayor has created a set of task forces to implement the sort of jointly adopted recommendation to close Rikers and create community jails. There's a task force on design and facilities. I think it's likely that some of the agencies involved in that task force will take the lead, and it does take time. And over the course of time, there needs to first of all be a set of siting decisions. Where do you put the new facilities? Do they go on the location of the existing facilities that we have in Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens? What do you do in the Bronx and Staten Island? After that, you go through a kind of intensive study and preliminary design process with the community. And then the city has something called a uniform land use review procedure. It's not 100% clear that it's necessary to go through that for the siting of every single facility, because we already have a lot of detention beds in those neighborhoods. It's possible we could just be rebuilding them or renovating them in some way. But regardless, you're going to go through a lengthy process of community consultation and approvals. Then you get into full design and construction. And there's a reason people talk about this taking a long time. That's probably a 5 to 8 year process to site and populate some of those jails. Okay, so let me turn to you, Glenn, for a second, because I mean, both of you have mentioned this. Carol mentioned it in her piece. What does, and the independent commission was very clear that we needed community involvement, both in thinking through the policy and the strategy and the design of this. What does that look like? What does community involvement mean as part of what is essentially a huge capital build and design project?
Yeah, I was part of the process to reopen the Brooklyn House of Detention back in, I think, 2009. And the first thing I'll say is you have to make sure you have a true swath of the local community. What I found was missing at those discussions were some of the low-income New Yorkers who lived in the neighborhood, particularly the people who had family members who were arrested under our current policing policies. I found that their voices actually were not meaningfully included in the conversation. I think that's a mistake. I think it's important to have a diverse group of people in the room so that they can actually listen to their neighbors, and folks who may never be impacted by our criminal justice system in New York get a better understanding of how our criminal justice system operates, how it impacts families and entire communities. And so I think there are ways to do that through town hall type discussions, but I think it's also important to meet people where they are. So I think this idea of centrally locating town halls can be part of the discussion, but where are people already gathering in the community, and how do we bring the discussion to them? Because for some people, literally taking a train ride to some central location might not be something that's affordable for them.
When most people think of jails, to the extent they think of them, they may think of the Brooklyn House or the Tombs in Lower Manhattan, two not particularly attractive buildings that are both obviously outdated. Yeah. I mean, can you give us a sense, what do, since we will have this design process, we're going to have community involvement, everyone talks about modern state-of-the-art facilities, but what does that mean? What do these things look like?
Yeah, well, first of all, I do want to say that, in addition to the ways that you involve people in the community, the other thing that's really important is just how you communicate information to people. And the rule for that is just early and often, and being very open. I mean, the thing that people will get concerned about is, first, there's the things that are specific to this, like public safety and perceptions of those kinds of issues. But in the end, what people care about when you site a facility in their community is parking, traffic, height, density, and there are time-tested ways of making sure that people understand the impacts of a new facility or a site in their community on that. As for what the facilities look like, there are some very good examples of community-based jails, and they follow a set of design principles that are important. They include having housing arrayed in clusters so that people can live in a more sort of communal area. They're just fundamental building design, like allowing direct supervision. ensuring that you have town halls within those clustered housing areas so that when, a lot of the services, Glenn can speak to this better than I can, that are delivered in the jail system are delivered by not-for-profits and social service agencies. Well, they shouldn't have to do that in a room that's supposed to be used for another purpose. They should have their own place where they can deliver those services. And then having, normative furniture and fixtures, basically all the things that go into good building design are key to success in a facility like this.
So let me follow that up with Glenn, because Andy King in the piece, one of the things he said was, you don't get a better system just by, closing a building and essentially building another building. Like, what do you think of that? I mean, obviously there's a consensus that Rikers is outdated. We're going to build new modern facilities that have the characteristics Jamie talked about. But is that enough?
I'm glad Jamie talked architecture, because a lot of New Yorkers don't realize, some folks say, well, why don't we just rebuild on Rikers Island? The problem with that is that Rikers, in terms of proximity to the airport, creates limitations on the way you can actually build the jail. So instead of having these modular jails where the correction officer has full line of sight, you have these very flat and linear facilities. And if you rebuild, you're going to end up with the same thing. The thing I'd say to Councilman King is, as someone who's been in these local facilities and been at Rikers, there's a reason we call Rikers Gladiator School. It's been called that for decades now. It's earned that reputation, rightfully so. It is a very violent place. It's a place where correction officers, partially because of the architecture of the facility and the danger to themselves, have decided to cede their authority to some of the detainees to help control other detainees. And that does not happen in the Brooklyn House of Detention. The level of violence that you see at Rikers doesn't happen in the Brooklyn House of Detention. It is just a different environment where correction officers walk out into a community and are better reminded of the fact that the people that they're serving, the people who they are guarding, are folks from those communities. And so culture is a big part of it. People say you can train officers for different outcomes, but officers at Rikers are consistently trained. We can do a better job. But I think part of it is the longstanding culture of violence at Rikers. And so I respectfully disagree with the council member.
How do you think about how you're going to handle objections to this, whether they're of the, too much traffic, too much construction, or the more sort of fear-mongering, new jails will bring in, more crime and disorder. All this is New York City. All those things are to be expected. I mean, how are you and the folks you work with, how are you gearing up to sort of deal with this?
Sure. I mean, the first thing I'll say is, Rikers is every jail and every jail is Rikers. There's some unique things about the facility and its location, its remoteness, and so on. But some of these very same challenges that you're bringing up exist in places all over the country. And so there's examples of where we've successfully been able to educate the community so that the community actually comes on board. I mean, I used to run a reentry organization that cited reentry housing in communities, namely Harlem, New York. And what we found is talking to folks early and often, listening to them, inviting them into the space, having their voices heard, responding to their concerns is a big part of how you overcome NIMBY. NIMBY is about lack of transparency, about misunderstanding, about ignorance. I think the other piece is having people who've actually served time expressing their experience to the public about what worked for them and what didn't work. Because what most people want is public safety. And if the very people who've actually been consumers of our jail services, if you will, are telling you that lack of services, lack of access to counsel and so on is part of what didn't work for them, I would argue that listening to them about what works makes sense for everyone. And so we are doing public education work. We're doing billboards around the city. We're doing op-eds and anything we can do to really educate the public to move away from the narrative that most people have about who we lock up in this country. If you look at Rikers, I mean, 50% of the population turns over every 10 days. And usually when people hear that alone, they say to themselves, well, wait a minute, I mean, who are we really locking up and why? And where's the public safety value of that? Because part of closing Rikers and building these new facilities is actually to cut the population in half from where we are now. And people hear that and they say, well, oh my God, where are we going to put all these detainees? Not realizing that if you look just 25 years ago, we've actually already cut the population in half.
Right, and that's one of the interesting things about Rikers that in some ways is little known of the city jail system is that our population now, which is hovering a little under 10,000, is less than half that it was already 20 years ago. And as you say, the commission and the mayor both anticipate you can have 5,000. So Jamie, let me go to you, because I'm trying to anticipate what some of the objections are going to be. And you can imagine, you know, riffing off what Andy King said, you know, there are going to be versions, whether they're community members or politicians, saying, well, you know, jails will make the neighborhood less safe. It's bad for economic development. What's going to happen if I have a new jail in my neighborhood? Can you sort of address those, especially because we already have jails in neighborhoods? Yeah. What's that experience been like?
I think it's useful to get specific, right? Glenn was talking about the goal is to get down to a population that needs to be housed of something like 5,500 at any given time. The other thing that's really important is there's a lot of innovation in the way that you treat different populations that are detained for one reason or another, separately or together. So, you know, another goal here is not to just be putting everybody in these community facilities, but, you know, the Administration for Children's Services is going to be working by next year to have all 16 and 17-year-olds in juvenile detention centers, looking at how you get women into separate facilities. So you're looking at a facility or a set of facilities that, first of all, has a diminished need to house a population. At that point, as you say, there are really two active, but 3 existing facilities in Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens that have about 2,100 beds in them right now. You know, people are familiar with the Brooklyn House of Detention. They're familiar with the Tombs, but most of the Tombs is actually a processing facility. It's offices. It's a court facility. There's not, you know, those buildings are not all jail beds that are in them. And then you've got a facility that's not active in Queens, but has about 500 beds in it. So all of those places are already existing facilities. They're in place, but they're, you know, built like the buildings that are on Rikers Island. They're built like fortresses. They don't have any of those characteristics of design that architecture that we talked about that allow you to get those outcomes. So, you know, all you're really going to get here is an improvement as it relates to those facilities, because you're going to get a more humane one that generates less violence for offenders and less violence for officers. So that it's really a positive outcome in that sense, an upgrade.
You know, to be really crass here, in 2009, when I was part of the discussion about reopening the Brooklyn House of Detention, I listened to the community, and the community didn't say no. The community said, well, what if? You know, what if we had retail stores at the foot of this new jail? What if we had community space for yoga at the foot of this jail? I think through the ULEP process, what we'll find, if we do a good job as advocates of educating the public, and if government does their job, that it'll be much more of a nuanced conversation about, okay, if we get this jail, what comes with it? You know, what does this community need, and how can this new construction address some of those needs? And I think that that sort of nuance and that sort of listening to the public and responding to their needs is going to make this a softer blow.
Yeah, and those are both really good points. As you both know, I was also on the commission, and one of the things we thought a lot about, especially in the, as you say, in the place we have jails now, is that even with those jails, and they're all particularly hideous facilities, both inside and outside, the neighborhoods around it are fine, and downtown Brooklyn is booming. And you'll never have a jail that looks like that again. No one will ever build a jail that looks like that. They'll all be architecturally more beautiful. As Glenn said, they'll have community-based purposes. They will have retail. They'll serve community purposes. And I think that's probably a big selling point, as you say, for getting people to think a little differently about jails.
Yeah, can I make another point? For people who don't think about criminal justice, but think about things like the environment or traffic in the city, we spend $35 million on buses transporting people, 300 buses a day, transporting people back and forth to the court from Rikers Island. In fact, our uptick in accidents in New York, the Department of Correction leads the way in those car accidents. And part of it is having those buses on the road every day, and having community-based facilities will significantly reduce that. A lot of people don't realize that the borough-based jails tend to have tunnels that go through to the courts. So you're actually not having the back and forth transport, and to be frank, not even seeing the movement back and forth of detainees.
Right.
You know, I think that we've all gotten used to, especially over the last few decades, the sort of high-quality architects who are commissioned to design public institutions or nonprofit institutions. We have, a new generation of beautiful courthouses. Maybe you don't see as many in New York City, but you look at cities across the country, and the federal government has funded beautiful institutions that are designed by really high-quality architects. Another example of great institution is, your presidential libraries that have been built in the last generation. Bringing in high-quality architects and landscape architects to think about this stuff. And of course, as higher learning has blossomed in our country and campuses have seen redesign, including in New York City, you've got great architecture involved in that. The one place where you haven't yet seen that is in architects who are willing and commissioned to go and design jail facilities. And I think some of that has been the perception amongst the design community that they don't feel like it's a good thing to go and design a jail. But once you tilt the conversation in this direction, that we're achieving better justice outcomes in communities, and get the architecture community involved, I think you're going to start to see a lot of innovation in the way this stuff gets delivered.
Yeah, and that's certainly the hope. So we only have a minute left, but let me ask each of you just in a few seconds. So 6 months have already transpired since the commission issued its recommendations. So quickly, from both your point of views, what's next?
For me, I would obviously like to see this process go a lot more quickly. When I listen to my constituents, families, and people harmed by Rikers, they want to see the process go more quickly. So what we're going to spend time doing is continuing to hold City Hall accountable while we simultaneously educate the public about the needs for these smaller, more humane, more aesthetically pleasing facilities.
I think government works slow, and you have to have some toleration for that, but recognize that you got to push them to move faster. It's good that the mayor's office is getting organized to start getting this work done, and I think next they'll start to look very specifically at a process for siting and design. But the nonprofit, the private sector has to keep the pressure on. And not just keep the pressure on, but also there's a lot of stuff that government can't do by itself. And I think in this case, actually thinking about what a humane, community-based jail facility looks like, it also falls on the people that were on this commission and people outside of that commission to help to deliver some of that stuff so that they have the resources they need.
Well, thank you both so much. This has been really fascinating. That's all we have time for. Thank you again for watching The Wonk. I'm Michael Jacobson, and we will be back soon with more in-depth policy discussions about our city. See you next time on The Wonk.